I was halfway through slicing the lemon pie when my father cleared his throat. The Johnson farmhouse had a way of making sound travel, floorboards that sighed, a furnace that groaned, coyotes that tuned their voices to the wind coming off the Front Range. But that night, at my mother's 62nd birthday, his throat clearing landed like a gavel. Everything in the dining room paused, the drip from a wax candle, the clink of a fork, even the laugh my mother was forcing for the neighbors she wanted to impress. "Clara," he said, eyes fixed on the chipped rim of his coffee mug, "your mother and I made a decision." My hand stilled on the pie server. I'd spent the afternoon layering slices like roof shingles because Mom liked them neat, because guests notice sloppy pies, because I am the daughter who notices what keeps a roof from leaking, whether it's pastry or cedar. "The ranch will transfer to Ethan," he said. The words were simple, the air around them was not. I looked at my mother. She didn't blink. She wore the pearls she saves for church and verdicts. "It's time," she said. "Your brother has a family to think about. He can build a future here." The lemon scent turned metallic in my mouth. Outside, dusk slid down the hills like a dark coat. Inside, memories rose like steam, night shifts, the VA hospital, knuckles ground raw by winter fence wire. The mortgage envelopes in a stack I kept hidden under the bread box. The second job I took after my honorable discharge to keep hay in the barn and the lights from flickering. "Ethan?" I asked, as if there might be another Ethan in our lives besides the one who'd learned the shape of a bar stool better than the shape of a post-hole digger. My voice stayed level. The Army had taught me that much. Dad nodded at his coffee. "He'll move in by summer. You can make arrangements." Make arrangements. 2 words I'd heard over bodies and battlefields. In hospitals, we used them for families that never saw the hit coming. Here they were a scalpel with no anesthesia. The neighbors kept eating. They weren't stupid, they felt it the moment a family becomes a courtroom. But they were also from Colorado. You mind your plate until the stampede passes. I set the server down. It kissed the glass with that high, thin ring only honest things make. "I've been paying the note," I said. "No accusation, just a weather report. And the feed store and the vet when Juniper tore her tendon." Mom smiled with a sweetness that curdled at the edges. "Of course you helped. That's what you do, Clara. You always help." Help, the word I dragged through snowstorms and summer droughts, the word that had blistered my palms and lined my ledger with red ink that was somehow mine alone to erase. "We'll handle the legalities," Dad murmured. "What legalities?" I asked. Silence sat down at the table like an uninvited cousin. The candle burned lower. Wax puddled and tugged at the tablecloth like it wanted to flee too. Mom glanced toward the hallway. The old office with its locked file cabinet where granddads will used to live like a sleeping horse. "Don't make this difficult," she said, the same tone she used when the pastor asked for volunteers and she volunteered me. I could have stood, flipped the pie, made a scene worthy of a country song. Instead, I breathed. "Combat medics don't waste energy on theatrics, we triage." I found my phone by feel. The cracked case scraped my palm. My thumb hovered over one name, Maggie. Sergeant first class then, attorney now, the person who had held pressure on a wound while I told a boy from Nebraska that he could go home if he wanted and he said not yet. After dessert, Mom said brightly, turning to the neighbors, "We'll sing." As if music could plaster over structural rot. We sang, harmony laced with undertow. I cut clean slices. I passed plates. I watched the people I loved most look everywhere but at the ledger of what love had cost. When the last car's headlights shrank down the county road, the house exhaled. The furnace coughed. Coyotes tuned up beyond the cottonwoods. My parents busied themselves with dishes because clatter is a good way to drown out truth. "I'll start packing the tack room tomorrow," I said, calm, efficient, deadly. Mom turned, dish towel clenched. "Don't be dramatic." "I'm being practical." I took my coat from the hook by the door, the same nail Granddad hammered in the year I learned to read a sky for hail. "I'll be out of your way." Dad's mouth opened, closed. He was a decent man built from quiet, but quiet can be a kind of cowardice. Outside, the cold bit sharp. Stars pinned the night up high. I leaned against the porch post Granddad had sanded smooth with his palm and called Maggie. She answered on the second ring. "Johnson," she said, still Army even in the way she said my name. "What's bleeding?" "Paperwork," I said, "or the absence of it." I told her about the decision, about Ethan, About the office with the locked cabinet and the way Mom's eyes skipped over mine like stones on a river surface. Do not move a box, Maggie said, her voice turning to the steel we kept in our rucks. Not until I see whatever legalities means. Granddad promised me, I said, the words smaller than the feeling behind them. He put my name on the deed. I don't have the paper. I have his hand on my shoulder, telling me the ranch stands because I held the line. Memories don't win in court, she said gently, but signatures do. I'll start with the clerk's office in the morning. You start with receipts, feed, vet the mortgage you covered, make a list, make 3. I looked out across the pasture. Moonlight silvered the frost, the old windmill clicked like a metronome keeping time for a band that had forgotten its song. The horses turned their heads toward me, soft exhalations ghosting the air. Roger that, I said, the words slid back on like a uniform I thought I'd folded away for good. I spent the next hour moving through the house like a quiet storm, not packing, cataloging, this lamp mine, those halters mine, the farrier invoices mine. I took photos, emailed copies to Maggie, organized files into a folder labeled in all caps because sometimes you need to see your claim in black and white. At midnight, I reached the office door. The key hung on a nail behind the frame where Mom thought no one would look. My hand hovered, then fell. Not tonight. There's a way to win that doesn't feel like breaking in. There's a time to kick a door and a time to let a lock condemn itself. In the kitchen, the lemon pie sat with 2 slices missing. I wrapped it tight. I wrote a note on the foil because manners are armor too. Save me a piece for tomorrow. I almost added if there is a tomorrow, but melodrama isn't my brand. In my room, I pulled the old duffel from under the bed. The canvas still smelled like dust and diesel and 1,000 miles of road. I didn't fill it, not yet. I set it by the door like a promise. Before I slept, I stood at the window and mapped the land the way a medic maps a body. Weaknesses, strengths, places where pressure saves you, places where it kills. The ranch didn't sparkle. It wasn't the kind of pretty you frame. It was a working kind of beautiful, the kind that stays standing because somebody stays stubborn. I touched the glass. I'm still here, I told it and maybe told myself. Then I lay down, boots inside the door, phone on the nightstand, Maggie's last text lighting the screen, paper beats pearl necklaces, be ready at 0800. I slept hard and light at once, the way you do when you know morning brings a fight, but for the first time all night, the fear wasn't bigger than me. The alarm went off at 5:30 a.m., the same time it had during deployments. My body didn't need the chime, habit had already dragged me up before the second buzz. I swung my legs over the edge of the bed and stared at the duffel bag by the door. Last night it looked like a threat. This morning it looked like insurance. The house was quiet. Mom and Dad slept down the hall, their door closed. The hallway dim except for the nightlight Dad always left plugged in like a talisman against the dark. For a second, I almost convinced myself last night had been a bad dream, that I had imagined the words, "The ranch will transfer to Ethan." But the silence in these walls had a way of holding on to truths, even when people tried to bury them. I padded to the kitchen. The lemon pie sat on the counter under its foil, exactly where I'd left it. My note was still there. Nobody had touched it. That told me everything. They'd gone to bed pretending nothing had happened. I poured coffee into Granddad's chipped enamel mug. The handle was warm in my palm, grounding me in something older and sturdier than my parents' schemes. I stepped out to the porch. The cold Colorado dawn slid across the pastures, frost crunching under my boots as I walked toward the barn. The horses nickered when they saw me. Juniper stamped her injured leg gently, the one I'd nursed back from a torn tendon with night checks, ice wraps, and vet bills I paid off one painful installment at a time. Ethan hadn't been there for any of it. He'd been in Phoenix back then, chasing some get-rich-quick idea with craft beer and pool halls, while I stood here in the dark, whispering to a half-lame mare that she'd run again. I leaned against the stall door, remembering the winter of the foreclosure notices. Dad had been laid off from the plant. Mom's hours cut at the clinic. The kitchen table had looked like a battlefield, paper after paper spread like enemy maps. Notice of default, final warning, auction pending. I was still in uniform then, home on leave. Dad couldn't look at me, his shoulders had collapsed inward. Mom kept saying, "We'll figure something out," though her voice trembled like a wire pulled too tight. I didn't think, I acted. Soldiers do. I called my bank, drained every cent of savings I'd stashed since Afghanistan, and told the loan officer to clear the debt. $80,000. Just like that. When I walked back into the kitchen with the receipt, Mom cried, Dad muttered a thank you, and I thought I'd saved us. But even then, a small voice inside me whispered, this wasn't just for them. This was for the land, for Granddad's promise, for me. That voice is the reason I painted the living room beige, why I replaced the warped floorboards, why I bled on the wood when the hammer slipped. Every improvement was a declaration, I belong here. This ranch is mine as much as my breath is mine. But belonging, it turns out, doesn't matter if people decide you don't. I walked back toward the house, the mug still steaming in my hand, and thought about Ethan. My brother who called twice a year, usually drunk. Who never mailed a cent when Dad's truck broke down, never visited when Mom had surgery, never showed up when I patched the roof in a hailstorm. Yet now they were handing him the deed like a prize. It wasn't just favoritism, it was betrayal. By the time I reached the porch, my phone buzzed. Maggie, exactly on time. Morning, Sergeant Johnson, she said, voice crisp, caffeinated. I spoke to a clerk at the county office. There's record of a will filed by your grandfather. We'll need to get a copy. I'm heading down there at 9. My grip tightened on the mug. So I wasn't imagining it. Nope, he left instructions, whether your parents admit it or not. There's a paper trail. Paper doesn't lie. I sat on the steps, cold seeping through my jeans, staring at the land. I poured everything into this place, Maggie, my paycheck, my hands, my back. Every time they asked, I gave, and now my throat burned. Now they're telling me I never mattered. Maggie paused. I could hear her keyboard clicking faintly in the background. Clara, I served beside you. I watched you carry men bigger than you across sand that could boil an egg. You don't fold because people decide you should. You hold. That's what you do, so hold now. We'll make this right. Her words steadied me. I sipped the coffee, bitter and bracing. The sun broke the horizon, splashing gold across the fields, lighting up the frost until it looked like shards of glass. I thought of Granddad. Of the mornings he'd take me fishing, his voice gruff but soft when he said, one day this ranch will be yours, Clara, because you care for it the way I did. And for years, I thought that was just love talking. Now I prayed it had been law talking too. I drained the mug, stood and squared my shoulders. Last night had been the ambush. Today would be the counterattack. By mid-morning, I was driving into town, the ranch shrinking behind me in the rear view like a place I suddenly wasn't sure belonged to me anymore. The heater rattled in my old Ford, and the radio spit static before catching on a country station crooning about losing trucks and love. 2 on the nose. I snapped it off. Silence was better company. The courthouse in Greeley was a squat brick building that smelled of dust and bureaucracy. Maggie met me on the steps, files tucked under her arm, her blonde hair pulled into the same no-nonsense bun she'd worn under Kevlar. She didn't waste time with greetings. They filed your grandfather's will here, she said, holding up a folder. We're requesting a certified copy, could take a few days. My stomach nodded. A few days, that was longer than the 48 hours my mother had given me. Meanwhile, Maggie continued, you start writing everything down, every expense. Every repair, every sacrifice. Think of it as building a battle report. The more evidence we have, the less wiggle room they've got. I nodded, the soldier in me responding to orders, but the daughter in me still flinched. On the drive back, I thought about Ethan. How Mom's voice softened whenever she spoke of him. How Dad's eyes lit up when Ethan managed to hold a job longer than 6 months. I thought about the graduation parties where my achievements, degrees, medals, promotions were nodded at, while Ethan's newest business idea got paraded around like a parade float. I remembered last Christmas. Snow had piled knee-high, the roads icy. I'd spent the morning clearing the driveway so neighbors could get through, my hands numb even through insulated gloves. When I finally came in, frozen and exhausted, Mom was on the phone with Ethan, laughing like she hadn't laughed with me in years. She didn't even notice the snow dripping from my coat onto the floor. That was the pattern, their pride always reserved for him. My hard work was invisible, absorbed like the ranch's wooden beams absorbing decades of smoke. His smallest gestures, though, were fireworks. The ranch's front gate creaked when I swung it open that afternoon. I parked by the barn and saw Mom on the porch, phone pressed to her ear, her voice sweet as honey. Ethan. I didn't need to hear his name. I knew the tone. When she spotted me, she covered the receiver and hissed, "Don't stomp around, Clara. I'm talking to your brother." I stared at her for a beat too long. Your brother? The phrase stung worse than the cold. Not our son, not your sibling. Always framed around him, never me. She turned back to her call, laughter spilling through the phone line. I walked past her into the house, each step echoing the weight of years I'd been the invisible one. In the kitchen, Dad was reading the paper, glasses perched on his nose. He looked up briefly. Your mother's proud of Ethan, he said softly, as if anticipating my thoughts. And not of me. The words were sharper than I intended. He folded the paper, sighing. You've always been dependable, Clara. That's different. Dependable, the word landed like a chain across my chest. Dependable meant useful. Dependable meant expected. Dependable didn't win you love, it just kept you busy enough not to ask for it. I set my hands on the counter, knuckles white. I paid off this house. I kept it from falling apart. What has Ethan done? Dad's silence was answer enough. I walked out before my anger boiled over, boots thudding across the porch, the chill air slapping my face. Out by the fence line, I leaned against the post Granddad had set decades ago, his initials still carved into the wood. The wind bit my skin, but inside, another truth bit harder. I'd spent years ignoring these shadows of favoritism, convincing myself they were just tricks of the light. But now I saw them for what they were, patterns carved deep, as deliberate as the will they had hidden. They didn't just prefer Ethan, they had always chosen him. And this time they had chosen him over me with the very roof above my head. That night I couldn't sleep. The walls of the farmhouse creaked like they always did in winter. But instead of comforting me, the sound felt like a countdown. 48 hours. Less now. The clock on my nightstand blinked 1:17 a.m., its red digits reminding me of military watches in desert tents where seconds stretched into lifetimes. I lay there staring at the ceiling beams my grandfather had sanded smooth with his own hands. If I closed my eyes, I could still see him on the porch, a battered hat shading his face, his hands calloused from decades of ranch work. He smelled of leather and tobacco, of soil turned by sweat. He was never a gentle man in words, but his presence had always been steady like the land itself. I remembered one summer evening, God, I couldn't have been more than 15. We were out by the oak tree near the back pasture. He'd been fixing the fence, sweat dripping down his neck. I was holding nails, trying to be useful. Clara, he'd said, his voice gravelly but certain, this ranch doesn't stand on wood and wire, it stands on grit. Yours. I had laughed nervously. Mine, I'm just holding nails. He squinted at me, hammer paused mid-swing. Don't sell yourself short. You've got the backbone for this land, more than anyone else in this family. One day it'll be yours. Back then, I thought it was just a way of making me feel special. Grandparents tell kids things to keep their spirits high. But the way he said it, his eyes locked on mine, it hadn't felt like flattery. It had felt like a promise. And he was a man who didn't break promises. The memory hit me with the same force as the hammer he'd driven into that fence post. It wasn't just a story, it was his truth. And maybe, just maybe, he'd made sure it wasn't only spoken. Maybe he'd put it on paper, tucked it into that will Maggie was digging up. I sat up in bed, heart pounding. For years I'd carried that memory like a warm ember. Now in the face of betrayal it flared into fire. I pulled the duffel bag closer, unzipped it, and tucked inside a photograph I kept of us, Granddad and me standing by that same oak tree. His hand rested heavy on my shoulder, mine gripping the fence post like it was a staff of office. That photo wasn't evidence in court, but it was evidence to me. Proof that this wasn't just about money or land. It was about legacy. When dawn came, I found myself walking back to that oak tree. Frost clung to the grass, crunching under my boots. The tree stood tall, gnarled, but unbroken, its bark scarred by decades of storms. I touched the trunk, rough beneath my palm, and whispered, I remember Granddad, I remember what you told me. A gust of wind rattled the branches, almost like an answer. I don't believe in signs, the army beat most of that out of me. But standing there I felt steadier, like the land itself had my back. The favoritism of my parents, the entitlement of my brother, the silence in this house, they weren't the final word. Granddad's promise was, And if his will matched his words, then I wasn't just fighting for a roof. I was fighting for the truth. By the next morning, the decision was made. Not by my parents, not by Ethan, but by me. I wasn't walking away blind. I wasn't packing boxes out of fear. If there was truth buried in some locked drawer at the courthouse, I was going to dig it up with my own hands if I had to. Maggie picked me up in her dented Jeep Wrangler, the same one she'd driven straight off base years ago. Her hair was pulled back, sunglasses on, a coffee thermos wedged between the console and the gearshift. She looked more like a soldier on a recon mission than a lawyer on her way to the clerk's office. "You ready?" she asked. I nodded, clutching the folder of receipts and bank statements I'd spent half the night pulling together. The numbers were ink on paper, but to me they were bone and blood. $80,000. Vet bills, lumber receipts, feed invoices. Proof that while my family leaned on me, I had held everything upright. The Chittenden County Clerk's office was a squat building that smelled of dust and tired fluorescent lights. Inside, people shuffled papers with the kind of monotony that only comes from years in government work. To me, it felt like a battlefield, quiet, but with consequences waiting to detonate. Maggie marched straight to the counter, introduced herself with her bar number, and requested the will of Thomas Johnson, my grandfather. The clerk disappeared into the back room. My pulse thundered in my ears, minutes ticked by like hours. When the clerk returned, he carried a thin manila envelope. He slid it across the counter, indifferent to the weight of history inside. Maggie opened it, eyes scanning fast, her finger sliding down the paragraphs. Then she stopped, her jaw tightened. She looked at me. "It's here," she said, her voice clipped. "Your grandfather left the ranch to you, sole heir, signed, notarized, and filed 3 years before his death." The air left my lungs all at once. I grabbed the counter for balance. All the late nights, the sacrifices, the whispers of favoritism, it all twisted together into a single truth. They had known, my parents had known. They never told me, I whispered. "No," Maggie said flatly. "They hid it. Probably figured you'd never ask. Probably figured you'd just keep working, keep paying, and when the time came, you'd step aside for Ethan like you always have." Her words cut deeper than any knife. I pictured my mother on the porch yesterday, voice soft when talking to Ethan. I saw my father, silent at the dinner table, nodding while she handed the house over. They hadn't just forgotten about me, they had deliberately erased me, my fists clenched around the folder. They wanted me to believe I never mattered, that all my sacrifices were just expected. Maggie leaned in close, her voice steady. "Clara, this will is ironclad. The law is on your side, but this isn't just about law, is it?" I shook my head, my throat burned. "No, this is about betrayal." On the drive back, I stared out the window, the Colorado plains stretching endless and empty. I remembered my grandfather's hand on my shoulder, his voice telling me this land would be mine. He hadn't been lying. My parents had. By the time we reached the ranch, my resolve had hardened like steel cooling in fire. Ethan might have thought he was inheriting a ready-made kingdom. My parents might have thought I'd swallow my pride like I always had. But this time I had the truth. And truth, I realized, is the sharpest weapon of all. I didn't tell them right away. Not about the will. Not about Maggie's discovery at the clerk's office. Some secrets are best wielded like a blade, kept sharp until the exact moment you need to strike. That evening, when the sun slid down over the Rockies and painted the sky in streaks of fire, I walked back into the farmhouse. The air smelled of Mom's pot roast, the same meal she always made when she wanted to paper over conflict. The table was set, the candles lit like last night's betrayal had never happened. Dad sat in his usual chair, paper folded neatly by his plate. Mom fussed with the silverware, her pearls catching the lamplight. For a moment, I almost let myself believe we could eat in peace. But the folder in my bag pressed against my hip like a secret too heavy to carry. "Sit down, Clara," Mom said, her tone brisk, as though I were a guest, not her daughter. "We should talk about timelines. Ethan will be here next week." I sat slowly, folding my hands on the table. "You've been keeping something from me." Her eyes flickered just for a second, but I caught it. Dad cleared his throat. "Clara, let's not make this more difficult than it needs to be." "Difficult?" My voice was steady, low. "You mean telling your daughter she has 48 hours to leave the home she saved? That kind of difficult?" Mom stiffened. "You helped, yes, but the house was never yours to give." I cut in. The silence that followed was thick. Even the old clock on the mantel seemed to stop ticking. Dad's eyes narrowed. "What are you saying?" I leaned back, watching them squirm. "I went to the courthouse today with Maggie. We pulled Granddad's will, the one you pretended didn't exist." The color drained from Mom's face. She reached for her water glass but set it back down without drinking. Dad's jaw worked, clenching and unclenching like he was chewing on excuses that wouldn't come. "He left it to me," I said, each word deliberate. "The ranch, every acre, every nail, not you, not Ethan, me." Mom's lips parted but no words came out. Finally she whispered, "You weren't supposed to know." That admission hit harder than any denial. I pushed my chair back, the legs scraping against the hardwood. "You hid his will. You let me bleed for this place, my money, my time, my life, and all the while you planned to hand it to him." Dad slammed his fist on the table, rattling the silverware. "We did what was best for the family." "No," I said coldly. "You did what was best for Ethan, you always have." The words hung between us, naked and undeniable. For the first time, I saw guilt flicker in Mom's eyes, but just as quickly it hardened into something else, resolve. "It doesn't matter what a piece of paper says. Ethan needs this place. He has a family, you don't." There it was, the knife slipped clean between the ribs, not just betrayal, but dismissal. I wasn't just being denied the ranch. I was being denied worth. I stood, slinging the folder onto the table. The envelope slid across the wood, bumping into the pot roast. "This isn't just a piece of paper, it's Granddad's word, his legacy, and I will fight for it. With every receipt, every witness, every neighbor who saw me keep this ranch alive while Ethan was off in bars." Mom flinched. Dad said nothing. I walked out before they could answer, the cold night air slamming against me like freedom. The stars overhead felt sharper, brighter, like they'd been watching the whole time, waiting for me to finally call the truth what it was. The secret was out, and now the war had truly begun. I didn't cry that night. Not one tear. The old Clara, the one who kept her head down, who patched roofs and paid bills in silence, she might have wept until her eyes swelled shut. But walking out of that dining room, leaving my parents sitting in stunned silence with the will staring back at them like a ghost, I realized something. Their betrayal had burned the last bridge between us. And once a bridge burns, you don't waste time mourning. You find another way across. I stood out by the oak tree under the stars, the winter air slicing my skin raw, and let the anger roll through me. Not the kind that blinds you, but the kind that sharpens you. In Afghanistan, I'd learned anger can be fuel if you harness it. Unchecked, it gets soldiers killed. Controlled, it keeps them alive. I pulled out my phone, thumb hovering over Maggie's name. She picked up on the first ring. "Talk to me," she said, voice firm like she already knew. "They admitted it," I told her, my breath puffed white in the cold. "They knew about the will, they hid it. Mom actually said you weren't supposed to know." There was a long pause on the line, then Maggie's voice, low and lethal, "Then it's war." I almost laughed at the simplicity of it, 2 words that fit better than anything else. We spent the next hour strategizing. I paced the porch, boots creaking on the old boards, while she laid out a plan like she was drawing battle maps again. Step 1. Secure every piece of evidence, bank records, receipts, vet bills, mortgage statements. Step 2. Line up witnesses, neighbors who'd seen me out here in the storms, the feed store owner who knew I was the one paying invoices, the bank officer who processed my payments. Step 3. File to enforce the will before Ethan ever set foot inside the house. By the time we hung up, my fingers were numb from the cold, but my pulse was steady, strong. Inside the house, I could hear my parents' muffled voices, tense and frantic. I didn't bother listening. Their words no longer had power over me. I went to my room, pulled out the battered green notebook I'd carried through 2 deployments and started writing. Line after line, I cataloged everything. $80,000 wire transfer to cover the mortgage. $4,200 in vet bills for Juniper. $1,800 in lumber and supplies for flooring. $600 in roofing shingles after the hailstorm. Each line was a scar. Proof of my devotion carved into ledgers instead of flesh. By midnight, the notebook was half full and my hand ached. But the ache felt good. Like training sore, the kind that tells you you're building something. I closed the book, set it on my nightstand, and stared at the ceiling beams. For years, I thought my role in this family was to hold everything together, to sacrifice quietly while they handed praise to Ethan like candy at a parade. But that night, for the first time, I felt the shift. I wasn't just the dependable daughter anymore. I was the rightful heir, the fighter, the one who wasn't going to fold. My parents had made a mistake. They thought betrayal would break me, but betrayal doesn't break a soldier, it forges one, and I was ready to fight. The next morning, I woke before dawn, adrenaline already thrumming like a second heartbeat. The ranch was quiet, but I no longer moved through it as the dutiful daughter. I moved through it like a soldier behind enemy lines, gathering intel, taking stock of everything that was mine, and planning the next strike. I spread my receipts across the kitchen table, the same table where my parents had delivered their betrayal 2 nights earlier. It looked like a war room now, papers lined up like troops on parade. Mortgage payments, feed store invoices, vet bills, lumber receipts with my signature scrawled across the bottom. Every scrap of paper was a bullet, and I intended to use them all. By 8 a.m., Maggie arrived in her Jeep, coffee in one hand, legal pad in the other. She scanned the table, nodded once. Good, this is the arsenal. We spent hours sorting, categorizing, marking dates and amounts. Maggie's handwriting was sharp and angular, her mind working like a surgeon's scalpel. This shows consistent financial contribution, she said, tapping a stack. This proves you weren't just a helper, you were the lifeline. I almost smiled. Finally, someone saw me. After lunch, I took the next step. If my parents wanted Ethan to inherit a ready-made life, they were in for a shock. I called Green Mountain Movers, a local outfit with a reputation for speed. A man named Tom answered. I need a rush job, I said flatly. Today, sofa, TV, washer, dresser, everything I bought with my own money. He hesitated. That's a lot to coordinate on short notice. I'll pay extra. Money I didn't have to spare, but resolve has a way of finding currency. Tom agreed to send a crew by noon. Before they arrived, I walked room to room with a pad of sticky notes, tagging what stayed and what went. The old dining table, Granddad's, would stay. But the chairs, mine. The beige curtains, mine. The stainless washer in the basement, mine. Every tag was an act of reclamation, proof that even if they'd tried to erase me, I was still written into every corner of this house. By the time the movers' truck pulled up, I was ready. 3 men in work boots and gloves stepped out, eyeing me for instructions. I led them through the rooms, pointing with precision. That sofa, wrap it. The TV, be careful with the screen. The washer, 2 men minimum. They didn't ask questions, they just worked. And as they hauled my belongings piece by piece into the truck, the house began to empty, echoing with the absence of everything I had poured into it. For a moment, it hurt, like watching pieces of myself carried away. But then I realized something. This wasn't loss. This was strategy. I was stripping the house bare so Ethan couldn't walk into a life I built with my hands. By mid-afternoon, the living room was hollow, walls bare where the TV once hung, floor scuffed where the sofa had sat. I stood in the silence, pulse steady. It didn't feel like defeat. It felt like taking back control. Maggie called as the movers shut the truck door. I've drafted the petition to enforce the will, she said. We'll file tomorrow. They can scream, they can threaten, but the law is on our side now. I exhaled slowly, gripping the phone tight. Then let them come, I'm ready. The betrayal had carved me open, but the preparation, the receipts, the movers, the legal plan stitched me back together with steel thread. For the first time since this nightmare began, I wasn't just surviving. I was fighting back. By late afternoon, the house no longer sounded like home. Every step I took echoed off bare walls. The mover's truck had rumbled away, carrying my sofa, my TV, my washer, everything I'd earned, everything I refused to let Ethan inherit by default. I was still tagging a few last items when the knock came. Sharp, impatient. When I opened the door, Ethan stood there with a suitcase at his feet, sunglasses still perched on his head though the sun was setting. His California polish looked out of place against the weathered wood of the farmhouse. He smiled like he owned the place already. Hey sis, he said, brushing past me before I could answer. His shoes clicked on the hardwood. Where's the furniture? I shut the door behind him, slow and deliberate. Gone, I took what's mine. He stopped mid-step, staring at the empty living room, his smirk faltered. What the hell do you mean yours? Mom and Dad said this house is mine now. You don't get to gut it. I crossed my arms, leaning against the door. Every piece you don't see anymore, paid for with my paycheck. You didn't contribute a dime. His face reddened. Unbelievable, you think because you threw some money around you're entitled to the whole damn place. I stepped forward, voice steady as steel. No, Ethan, I think because Granddad put my name in his will, I'm the rightful owner. You want to talk entitlement? Try walking into a house you abandoned for years and expecting it handed to you wrapped in a bow. He blinked, caught off guard. What will? I almost laughed. Of course they didn't tell you, but it doesn't matter, I've seen it. Maggie's filing it in court tomorrow. You're standing in my house, Ethan, not yours. He dropped his suitcase, fists clenching. Mom and Dad chose me for a reason. I've got a family to think about. You, he sneered. You've got nothing. The words sliced, but I didn't flinch. You're wrong. I've got proof, receipts, witnesses, the law, and the will. What do you have, Ethan? Empty promises and a history of running away. He stormed through the kitchen, eyes darting to the bare counters, the missing microwave, the tag still stuck to a few chairs. You stripped it down. You really think this makes you the winner? I followed him, calm but unyielding. No, this makes me smart. You don't get to inherit a ready-made life I built. If you want a house, furnish it yourself. His phone buzzed. He yanked it from his pocket, muttering curses as he dialed. I'm calling Mom. She'll deal with you. I leaned against the wall, arms folded. Go ahead, they already know, and they know I'm not backing down this time. He turned, eyes blazing, voice low with venom. You're done here, Clara. By tonight they'll be back and you'll be out. I straightened, stepping closer until we were face to face. No, Ethan, by tonight you'll realize the rules have changed. I'm not the dependable sister you can walk over anymore. I'm the heir. And I'm done letting you and them pretend otherwise. For a moment, the house held its breath. Then he grabbed his suitcase, muttered something under his breath, and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the frame rattled. The silence afterward was deafening, but it wasn't the silence of defeat. It was the silence before the storm. The next morning, I didn't walk into the courthouse as the daughter my parents dismissed. I walked in as the heir my grandfather chose. Maggie strode beside me, files clutched under her arm like ammunition. Every step echoed across the tiled floor, steady and unrelenting. Inside the small courtroom, the benches filled with familiar faces. Neighbors, the feed store owner, even Mrs. Linda from across the road, the one who always brought us cookies at Christmas. Their presence hit me harder than I expected. They'd seen me carry this ranch on my back. Now they were here to watch whether truth would finally carry me. Mom and Dad sat at the opposite table, stiff in their Sunday best. Dad kept his eyes on the floor. Mom's lips were pressed so tight they were nearly white. Ethan slouched beside them, glaring at me like I'd stolen something that was his by birthright. When the judge entered, the room shifted. Order, gravity. Maggie rose first. Her voice was sharp, every word cutting through the stale air. She presented the will, signed, notarized, filed legally 3 years before Granddad died. She laid out my receipts, my bank statements, my evidence of sacrifice, the mortgage payments, the vet bills, the repairs. Then she called witnesses. Mr. William, our neighbor, stood and told the court how he'd watched me out in snowstorms, hammering shingles back onto the roof. The feed store clerk testified that it was always my checks, not Ethan's, that cleared the bills. Even Mrs. Linda spoke, her voice trembling but clear. Clara kept that house alive. Everyone in Burlington knows it. I sat still, hands folded, heart pounding, but I didn't need to speak. Their voices carried mine. When it was my parents' turn, their lawyer tried to argue that the will was outdated, that circumstances had changed, that Ethan's family needs outweighed legal intent, but the judge cut through it. A will is not a suggestion, she said firmly. It is the final word of the deceased. Mom shot me a look then, half fury, half something that almost looked like fear. Dad wouldn't meet my eyes at all. When the gavel finally struck, the sound was final, like a nail driven deep. The court recognizes Clara Johnson as the sole legal heir to the Johnson Ranch. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Then the air rushed back into my lungs, and I realized I was gripping Maggie's arm, both of us steady but shaking with release. Ethan shoved his chair back, muttering curses. Mom whispered something sharp at Dad, who just sat frozen. The courtroom emptied slowly, neighbors filing past me with nods, some squeezing my hand, others whispering, "About time, Clara, about time." Out on the courthouse steps, the winter sun glared bright, the cold air biting but alive. For the first time in days, I felt taller, lighter, like I'd shed a weight I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying my whole life. The truth was no longer just mine. It was public. It was undeniable, and it was on record forever. The courthouse gavel was supposed to be the end, but the real fallout began afterward. 2 days later, the certified court order arrived in Maggie's hands. She called me into her office, a cramped little room above a diner in downtown Greeley. She slid the document across the desk like it was a metal pin to my chest. "There it is," she said. "The Johnson Ranch legally yours, no more debates, no more what-ifs. The law recognizes you as the sole heir." I picked it up with trembling fingers. Black ink on white paper, nothing more, and yet it was everything. Years of sacrifice, nights of doubt, all crystallized into this single truth: the ranch was mine. But ownership, I realized, wasn't just about deeds or signatures, it was about power. And that power was shifting fast. News travels quick in Burlington. By evening, half the town knew the story. People whispered in the diner, nodded at me in the grocery store, stopped me on the sidewalk. They didn't just see me as dependable Clara anymore. They saw me as the woman who stood up to her family, fought for what was right, and won. Meanwhile, my parents' reputation cracked like ice in spring. Mrs. Linda told me she'd overheard neighbors talking, how my parents had hidden the will, how they'd tried to cut me out, how they'd chosen favoritism over fairness. In a town like ours, character is currency, and theirs was bankrupt. Ethan didn't take it well. He showed up at the ranch one afternoon, red-faced, demanding to be let in. When I met him at the gate, papers in hand, I didn't raise my voice. I just showed him the court order, held steady while he raged. "This isn't over," he shouted, fists clenched at his sides. "Mom and Dad will appeal. They'll lose." I cut in, calm, cold. "The will is ironclad. You've got nothing but entitlement and excuses. This ranch was never yours, Ethan, not legally, not morally, not ever." His jaw tightened, but the fight drained from his eyes. He turned and stomped away, gravel crunching under his boots. For the first time in years, I wasn't the one backing down. That night, I walked the property alone. The oak tree stood tall in the moonlight, branches creaking against the wind. I touched its bark and whispered, "I did it, Granddad. They can't take it from me now." But even as pride filled my chest, something else stirred, a heaviness. I had won the ranch, yes, but in winning, I'd lost the illusion of family. The people who should have been my greatest support had become my greatest opposition. Still, as I looked at the land, frost glittering silver across the fields, I knew this. I hadn't fought just for wood and soil. I'd fought for truth, for recognition, for myself. And the law had finally said what my parents never could, that I was the rightful owner. Owning the ranch should have felt like victory. For a while, it did. Each time I walked the fields, court order tucked in my jacket, I felt a current of pride run through me, like I'd finally reclaimed what had always been mine. But as weeks turned into months, something shifted. The land carried not just memories of my grandfather's hands and my sacrifices, but also the echo of betrayal. Every beam I had hammered reminded me of nights my parents ignored me. Every corner I had painted reminded me of Ethan's sneer, of his sense of entitlement. It was mine, yes, but it was heavy. Maggie was the one who said it out loud. We were sitting on her apartment balcony, coffee steaming in our mugs, the city lights of Denver blinking in the distance. "You don't have to chain yourself to it, Clara," she said. "Winning it doesn't mean keeping it. Sometimes real victory is deciding how to use what you fought for." At first, the idea stung. Selling the ranch felt like betrayal of my grandfather's promise. But then I remembered his words, "This land stands on grit. Yours." Maybe grit wasn't about holding on no matter what. Maybe grit was knowing when to let go, so I made the call. A local agricultural investor bought the property within weeks, someone who respected the land, someone who would keep the fields alive. Not Ethan, not my parents, and not me. The day I signed the papers, I walked the boundary fence one last time. The oak tree swayed in the wind, branches whispering like an old friend saying goodbye. I pressed my palm to its bark and whispered back, "Thank you." Then I left the ranch behind. Now I live in a small apartment in Denver, sunlight streaming through big windows I picked myself. My sofa, my TV, my washer, they're here with me, proof of what I carried forward. My days are filled with work at community clinic, nights with Maggie and a circle of friends who see me as more than dependable. They see me I haven't spoken to my parents or Ethan since the court ruling. Sometimes the silence hurts like a phantom limb, but mostly it feels like breathing fresh air after years in a smoke-filled room. I heard through a neighbor that Ethan had to dip into his savings to buy a house in California. My parents moved into a rental on the edge of Burlington, their reputation frayed beyond repair. I don't rejoice in their downfall. I don't need to. Justice already did its work. What I need is peace, and I've found it. Looking back, I realized the ranch was never the real battle. The real battle was believing my worth depended on them, on their approval. Now I know better. My worth is mine to claim, written not in deeds or signatures, but in boundaries, choices, and the courage to walk away. Some nights when the city quiets, I sit by my window and sip coffee from Granddad's chipped enamel mug. The handle warms in my palm, grounding me, reminding me where I came from. And as the lights twinkle across Denver, I whisper to myself the truth that took me years to learn. Freedom isn't given, it's claimed, and I've claimed mine. In the end, Clara didn't just fight for a ranch. She fought for herself, for her dignity, her truth, and her freedom. The land was never about soil or fences. It was about her worth and the courage to draw a line when even family crossed it. Her story reminds us, sometimes the bravest thing you can do is not hold on, but to let go and to build a life on your own terms. If this story moved you, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories like this. And remember to hit the notification bell so you'll never miss the next chapter. Because somewhere out there, another voice is waiting to be heard, and maybe it's yours.